Please be seated. Well, thank you for that little, I love that hymn anyway. So it's great that you brought up the monarchy. We're celebrating the monarchy of Jesus Christ today. In 1925, soon after the end of what they ironically call the Great War, the church established the final Sunday of the church year, this last Sunday after Pentecost, the Sunday in America just preceding Thanksgiving Day. They established it as a major red-letter feast called the Feast of Christ the King. That was only 100 years ago. The Pope had a bigger, longer name for it, but it basically, at least in English, it was the Feast of Christ the King of the Universe. And I'm quite certain that the reason why the Pope did that at that time in Europe was because of the rise of fascism and other forms of monarchical or autocratic government that were popping up all over the place. And he wanted to say, no, we have this other one that we follow. It was a great aspiration. It was wonderful, except that the church caved within 10 years and was kowtowing to Mussolini and his ilk, and has been apologizing ever since, as they should. Monarchy and royalty make great poetry and great hymns too. And I'd be lying if I didn't say I love this feast day because I get to sing some of those hymns about the royalty of my Lord. But they don't make very good theology, certainly not Christian theology. And, speaking as an American, kingship has rarely been a model for life together in the United States. And monarchy doesn't fit us. Nor was it an unambiguous inspiration from the start, going back 3,000 years to the founding of Israel and Judah, of the United Monarchy. One of the greatest paradoxes of our entire of the Old Testament, the Hebrew Bible, concerns this issue of kingship. Some of the loudest movers and shakers at the time, 3,000 years ago, craved a king just like Egypt and Babylonia. Power and might and glory and pride and gold and so they called upon Samuel, the prophet, to anoint for them a king like all the other nations. And God would permit that, as history makes clear. The tragedies of history. But God, speaking through Samuel, had this to say about that proposition. Now I'm going to read you some of the Old Testament, so you got to put on your new ears. These, says Samuel, will be the ways of the king who will reign over you. He will take your sons and appoint them to his chariots and to be his horsemen and to run before his chariots. And he will appoint for himself commanders of thousands and commanders of fifties, and some to plow his ground and to reap his harvest and to make his implements of war and the equipment of chariots. He will take your daughters to be perfumers and cooks and bakers, not to mention the other stuff. He will take the best of your fields and vineyards and olive orchards and give them to his courtiers. He will take 1/10 of your grain and your vineyards and give it to his officers and his courtiers. He will take 1/10 of your flocks, and you shall be his slaves. And on that day you will cry out because of your king, whom you have chosen for yourselves, but the Lord will not answer you on that day. So today, I don't get to preach on the kingship of Christ. Sort of. I don't know what to say about it, really, because most of what you would say about kingship, Jesus wouldn't approve of. At his trial, when asked if he were king of the Jews, he flatly says, what? No, he doesn't say no. He says, these are your words. He does not speak that language. The clients of the Roman Empire charge him with treason for claiming to be king. And all the co-conspirators agree. So according to Luke's account, they must drive home their point by putting a sign on the top of his cross where he was lying dying, saying the King of the Jews. That sign is irony. Deep, deep, profound irony. And irony rules the world. Both sacred scrolls of Samuel, the books of Samuel, and the two sacred scrolls of 1st and 2nd Kings all share that point of view. But later on, I don't know this part of the story, they came along and they wrote the books of Chronicles, and the guys that wrote that must have been working for the king, because the story's all about how great it is to have wonderful kings. Same kings that were condemned by all the prophets for their failure to lead in a godly way. The people stoned the prophets when they proclaimed the authority of God over the kings. O Jerusalem, the one who kills the prophets and stones those who are sent to her. How often I have wanted to gather your children like a hen gathers her little birds, but you would not. You would not. This parish knows in its bones that while we are precious children of God, while we are chosen, not to sit at the right hand or the left hand of a monarch, but to search out and identify with and minister to and befriend and invite the stranger, the hungry, the shackled, and those bound by even more subtle forms of oppression. You guys know this. You know this. We treasure our little jewel box of a church here. And even though I haven't properly met even some of you, or many of you really, I would stake my retirement nest egg on a bet that you're drawn here, among other things, to renew your commitment to seek and serve Christ out there on the outskirts. And so, starting with Jesus on the margins, we erase those margins. Standing with Jesus, watch the walls and fortifications of the kings of this world crumble. Next Sunday afternoon, while folks are watching the Christmas parade, a few of us will be dancing along the sidewalk, offering free tickets to a chili supper here. And others will be here with the doors wide open, heating up the chili to create a feast for all comers. And if you're not serving that night, I hope and pray that you will come and eat together with your neighbors. We park ourselves right down here. This is the church that 25 years ago, or almost 25 years ago, sold its land out in the prosperous suburbs where all the big churches were going. We sold it and invested here in all sorts and conditions of human beings, our neighbors, and began erasing margins. We stand with the demoralized and with the demonized. We plant ourselves here with the dispossessed and the disposable. And we give our voices to the prophecy that one day we will stop throwing people away. The last and the lost are the only royalty in these halls. It's a tough sell, though. But we're catching a glimpse of the terrible cost of not caring and not trying. Last weekend, Helen and I, we sold bread and scones at auction for abandoned puppies and kittens. We did. 50 folks, maybe there were 75 were there, in 2 hours dropped more than 25 grand to save the poor puppies and kitties. And I love them. You know how I'm devoted to my four-footed friend. I do this for these animals all the time. But what if the prosperous bourgeoisie of our fair city would spend half that much of their disposable income to provide shelter to our homeless people? That would be an adventure in the kingship of Christ, I might dare say. When we trespass social and political boundaries into the outskirts, into the edges of society, those on the margin often wonder what we're doing there. Yeah? They aren't accustomed to our company. I know a woman who used to be an alcoholic and a drug addict, and she first got sober more than 20 years ago, right upstairs in that hall, where we'll have cookies later. She became the leader, actually, of a large annual march through town. Maybe you noticed it. It's not quite as popular as the Christmas parade, but it was a festival of sobriety, saying, we can do it, we do it. She was the first person in southeast Missouri to publicly call for the use of Narcan. And Father Ryan saw to it. I don't know, he never met her, but he saw to it that we were the first church to put one on the corner that will save the lives of an opioid overdosing person. This dear lady, I'll call her Sister Mary Martha, got married, and she had a beautiful little girl, and she was rolling right along, and then her husband got cancer, and they didn't have any nest egg or any insurance or anything, and she had to take care of him, and then couldn't pay the rent, and then he died, and then she was evicted, and then she was driven out of Cape Girardeau County because it was half as expensive to live in Bollinger County, and she wound up in what, until a couple years ago, I would have called a shack out in the woods. Oh my. She relapsed. She was all alone. Her daughter was taken from her and raised by strangers. Well, I hadn't seen her in a couple years. I thought she was just one more casualty of this terrible disease that I suffer from. But she told me she's going to be baptized. Wow! And she wanted me to come and be a part of that. Wow! Well, I told her that I was preaching at my old church that day. That was 2 weeks ago. I couldn't be there, and I apologized. And then I thought and prayed about it for a couple days. And I got my car and I drove up to Bollinger County to try to find her. I got lost. I got lost, so lost. Oh. I showed up. She invited me to her sitting room, which was the open fire pit outside, because there was not any room in the house, literally. But anyway, it took her completely by surprise. What are you doing here, Father Bob? But I got to tell you, I was there because of the inestimable value of witnessing the miracle once again. It's worth more to me than all the gold in Versailles. She asked, "What are you doing out here in the boondocks?" You see, it is a hard sell. It was a long way. GPSs don't work out there, you know. I said, "I'm just here to sit with you for a while and get up to date on this miracle that's happening." She said, "Right. It's not easy for them to understand." Well, with the help of that outdoor fire pit, we both warmed to the life that we used to share together, and conversation heated us up, talking about how we first got sober and all that stuff. And she then turns to me and says, I asked her, I said, "How did this happen? What happened? Tell me." She said, "Well, it was pretty simple." She said, "I've been having a bunch of one-on-ones, with God, and the dude shows up." That's all she had to say. And then she turns, her eyes getting moist, and looks down at the mud in the outdoor fireplace and chokes and says, "Why would he do that? Why would he show up for me?" God seeking out the least and the last is a tough sell, even and especially for those on the margins. And we must not forget that. In the end, the measure of our compassion to the least and the lost and the last among us lies not in our service to the unfortunate, but in our willingness to see ourselves in kinship with them. Jesus doesn't talk about how grand it is to feed the hungry and visit those in bondage. His identity with them is total. If you do it to them, you're doing it to me. Down to the last drop. Today you will be with me. Today you will be with me. I'm the hungry one. I'm the one in chains. The only kingdom where you'll find Jesus is the one where there are no boundaries, no doors, no separation between client and provider. So, Sister Mary Martha, she's had a tough life, She was abused and abandoned as a little girl. She predictably transmitted her pain, passed it along long before the Spirit got a hold of her and she started to transform it. Gangs and, dope rings in prison and rehab centers and drug courts. That was the story of Sister Mary Martha. And she carries that particularly heartbreaking pain of having to let a stranger raise her baby. The shame and the demoralization, which I think are the worst part of being poor, still weighs, though the stink of that has been washed away. Before the sun went down that afternoon, she bent over her lap sobbing by the fireplace, and I touched her shoulder and I said, "Why are you crying?" We were having a blast. And she looked up and blurted, this is really funny. She said, "I wish you were God." And I laughed. What else are you going to do? Run and hide. Anyway, why I said, and she caught her breath and she says, "I am so thankful to be baptized, to be delivered from hell, but I think you might let me into heaven." Now it's my turn to cry. So I'm sitting there crying, and I reach across the charcoal burner and grab both her bony hands, and I said, "Kiddo, I swear to you, if I get into heaven and don't find you, I'm coming after you. I'm going where you are." Sister Mary Martha changed my life 2 weeks ago. Knowing her has altered my path, as it will alter yours if you should ever be so fortunate to see your identity with those suffering like that. It brought me back to myself. We're all just diamonds coated in dust. She's teaching me that I'm not somebody, I'm everybody. And so is she. That's called mutuality. We have an old-fashioned word for that, kinship. That's our kingdom. That's what's left when the margins disappear. Kingship. Those are our words. That's our word. Kinship. That's another story. Sealed in the name of our Creator, our cross-bearer, and our Spirit.